Welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey, and with me today I have
Olga Gorbunova, project manager and principal at Stantec.
And Robert Reid, a senior project manager at Skanska.
And we're here today to talk about the East Midtown Greenway project, which is it's like basically, if you've ever been to Vancouver, it's like the seawall, but attached to Manhattan. And that's a really poor description that I'm sure is going to be made much better in the next 10 seconds or so. So maybe you guys could explain to me what in fact the Midtown Greenway project is and how it came about in the first place. What was the genesis of this project?
Sure. So the East Midtown Greenway is a bikeway, walkway, and park located actually adjacent to Manhattan between 53rd and 61st Streets. It's connected to the Sutton Place neighborhood by a pedestrian bridge, and it provides much needed refuge and park space to the neighborhood, which right now doesn't have a lot of park space per capita.
And how did Skanska and Stantec, how did they both get involved in the project?
Right. And I guess the Greenway project came about, planning happened back in the 90s. And today the city is working on a grand vision to actually close the loop of Manhattan Waterfront Greenway to provide New Yorkers with continuous waterfront access around. And the East Midtown Greenway is one of the remaining sections. In the early 2000s, New York State DOT actually performed the reconstruction of FDR Drive in this area and constructed the outboard detour roadway, which was a temporary roadway within the East River. And advocates for the Greenway project convinced permitting agencies to leave a row of caissons for future use to construct the Greenway. And that became kind of the inspiration for what you see today. And Stantec was selected in 2017 to lead the design of the project through construction.
Yes, Skanska was actually also involved very early with the project. Back in 2015, our Waterside Pier group, which was one of the earlier sections Olga mentioned for completing the loop around the city. This project was just south of the UN. Something I was involved with at the tail end. But our pre-construction group actually helped start the planning of this project. Back in 2015, we actually formally came on board with a new contract in 2017 with NYC EDC as well.
Okay. And Manhattan, as we all know, is very densely packed, and this is a very developed area to begin with. How did you have to accommodate that, and the fact that, it's New York, the quote unquote city that never sleeps? So I assume this is a 24-hour job as well. You had to work around all those factors while building this thing.
Yeah, I'll cover the design portions first and to get everyone acclimated. So the Greenway project has three main components. What we call the in-water structure is the structural component that supports the topside park. And there's a pedestrian bridge that connects the Greenway structure to the Sutton Place neighborhoods. The design of the in-water structure and topside elements are actually very interdependent. And there was a challenge to provide enough soil volume within the structure to support the trees and actually allow them to thrive while maintaining a minimal structural depth to preserve any water views that you can see from Manhattan. We were able to come up with a solution of a stepped structural section, which provides the soil volume needed and minimizes the depth of the structure. We have tub girders within the structure that also provide some vertical space for soil to support the trees. And we used soil cells under the bikeway to allow for uncompacted soil and lateral soil for the tree roots to grow into. And we also have some trench drains that along the bikeway that collect the rainwater as well as disperse it into the soil cells to allow the water to reach the tree roots across the entire section. Another challenge was finding space for the landside ramp within the Sutton Place neighborhood. The community loves the Sutton Place Park where the ramp lands. And the pedestrian bridge, which was designed by our partners, Rosales and Partners, connects the Greenway to the neighborhood. So in order to minimize impacts, we were able to connect the ramp at the highest ground, which was the north side of the park. We shortened the ramp lengths while maintaining universal accessibility. The ramp has an 8% slope, 2 landings, and curves within the alignment to minimize the footprint within the park and respond to the community's desires to maintain as much of the existing park as possible. And lastly, from a design perspective, we were designing adjacent to residential buildings. And in order to ensure that none of the lighting disturbed the neighbors, we advocated for non-standard davit poles in the pedestrian size in order to eliminate any light that may reach the windows above.
And Rob, what'd you have to add?
Yeah, as Olga mentioned, the Sutton Place Park neighborhood was very interested in what we were doing. They had a lot of questions. Yeah, they contact Skanska directly, reach out to EDC, and oftentimes we'd find that they're just going out on the street and talking to the crews that were available out there, just trying to learn whatever they could about the project and what we were doing that week and the following week. A lot of people actually really loved seeing the equipment while we were building the pier itself. What we ended up doing, just to kind of involve the community a little bit more, was we started weekly meetings with some of the key stakeholders, some of the building managers and co-op presidents, just so they could relay messages back to the people who actually live there and were in the neighborhood. This helped kind of eliminate a lot of potential complaints, I believe. And once people knew what we were doing, you kind of mentioned it earlier, if we had any oddball shifts we had to perform, if we were coming in over the weekend or working a double shift. We didn't do a lot of 24-hour work, but we did do a lot of double shifts for quite some time. And just giving the neighborhood that opportunity to know what we're doing and plan for it so they weren't disrupted, definitely, I think, went a long way with them.
Okay, and you've got a video up on, I think that's on Stantec's site, about, and one of the things in the video is about how this fills the hardest gaps of this sort of section. So maybe you could explain what that means in terms of building challenges. And also, I would assume one of the hardest gaps is building something in the water itself. So maybe you could explain building in water, because that's just an added layer of complication, I would think.
Sure, definitely. I can speak to the construction, let Olga come back to some of the design challenge we had. But yeah, what we learned early in the project, we knew we were going to have a single entrance point for deliveries. This is up at 60th Street, the northern point of this project, and it was very difficult to get standard just concrete and soil deliveries into the site. So we looked at all potential options we had, especially for concrete, and how we would service the project, and we knew we had to get creative. So we actually, with concrete, we ended up pumping concrete through a slick line, in some cases up to 1,500 lineal feet, just to reach the location where we had to. We also, on numerous occasions, closed the FDR at night and pumped from the FDR directly into some of the caissons that are right next to it as well. Just a couple weekends ago, we completed the ramp structure, which ties the Esplanade into the bridge that Olga discussed earlier, the pedestrian bridge itself. And we also, some cases, there are a few times where it made sense, we actually barged concrete directly from a concrete plant out in Queens, pushed everything out on barge by tugboat. And then some of the tub girders, which are the longer spanning precast elements that Olga will talk about, we actually had a small mixing plant on site, and we batched some of this very specialized ultra high performance concrete on the barges themselves and placed it directly instead of trying to ship it from a plant. Another really big challenge that we learned early on, luckily we had another similar project in the city that gave us some insight on it, but we knew we had to erect the pedestrian bridge mentioned earlier and install it in a single night over the FDR. So early in the project, probably 2.5 years ago, Olga with Stantec, EDC, DOT, and some of the other city agencies, we all started talking about it before it became a reality and started planning for this big activity. So it was actually, the bridge was actually fabricated in Nova Scotia, shipped down to Brooklyn by truck, multiple truckloads. We reassembled it on a barge, made sure everything fit tested everything out, and then shipped it by barge to the project on a Friday night into a Saturday morning. Had a whole bunch of visitors. Olga was out for it, and we were able to successfully install the bridge on pretty much the first attempt. And we actually used one of the largest marine cranes on the East Coast to get this in. It's not necessarily was a heavy load to pick the bridge. It was actually a pretty light bridge compared to the size. It just had a very long reach, working around the Esplanade and the other activities that we had going on. But everything worked out well with that task, and I think it's all due to the early pre-planning. Skanska has a process of plan, do, check, act, and I would say EDC and Stantec were totally involved in making sure this was a good, successful task for us.
Yeah, and you picked the coldest day of the year to pick the bridge.
And did you have any other insights on how difficult this was, Olga?
Yeah, well, the hardest gaps, as you said, required complex engineering and marine construction to build the corridor that we're trying to build for the bikeway and the walkway. And there just isn't sufficient real estate in Manhattan to accommodate the corridor. The Sutton Place neighborhood is bound by FDR, and even some of the buildings are supported on columns that straddle the FDR. So in order to create kind of the project, we designed the 40-foot wide in-water structure, which accommodates a 20-foot bikeway and a 10-foot minimum width of the walkway and plantings. And I think some folks might be interested in a few other project stats. So the project is about 8 blocks long, which is about 2,000 linear feet. The piles are as deep as 130 feet, including rock sockets. The pile spacing for the main structure is about 100 feet, and 54-inch tub girders span between the caissons, and most of the caissons were about 60-inch diameter. And this area, we call it the East River, but the East River is actually a tidal estuary, and the tides change direction throughout the day multiple times. The currents are very strong, and that makes, I think, construction in general very challenging. Moving any barge on site requires a lot of coordination and caution.
Okay. Olga, you also mentioned these soil cells, which this may not be new, but it was definitely new to me. Because some of you can go into more detail into how that works, so like building actual a sort of layer of soil within the bridge itself that sort of feeds all the biological life that you've got on the bridge, as opposed to just planting plants and then maintaining them.
Yeah. So the soil cell is a manufactured product. It's like plastic, and think of it as table with legs and chair and a top, and that lines the entire length of the bikeway, and that provides the soil volume needed for trees, which is about 800 to 1,000 cubic feet of soil for the trees to be able to survive and even thrive. And these soil cells prevent the soil from compacting from use of the bikeway and any maintenance vehicles. So it was a way to protect the soil for the long term and allow there to be enough air and space for water to distribute throughout, and also protect the bikeway from any kind of settlement issues that could create maintenance challenges down the line. And this was important to us because we know that extreme heat is the #1 weather-related killer. So having ample trees throughout the length of the greenway and the structure was a top priority for our designers.
Okay, and I guess my final question would be, given the floods we've seen that hit not just New York, but New York has gotten it bad, basically, from a couple of recent floods, and this is just by, like you said, the East River. What sustainability measures and sort of resilience measures were put into place for this structure, just so that if there is another flood, it's going to withstand that?
Yeah, so the structure was designed to elevation 15 to account for 36 inches of sea level rise expected in 2100. That's the median value estimate from the New York City panel on climate change. Our structure actually had a 75-year service life. That's why we were designing for 2100. And we just wanted to make sure that if it floods, the structure itself would be unaffected, and if there are any minor repairs to the topside elements, those could be done without issue. The other sustainability measures is we actually came up with some goals to guide the design process itself. So we wanted the structure to be self-sufficient and minimize any energy demands, and we are harvesting the stormwater for reuse with the trench drains I mentioned earlier, which collect the rainwater from the bikeway and distribute it into the areas of the soil cells so that the soil is actually activated throughout the whole cross section. We wanted the project to be resilient, so that's where we designed for sea level rise, and we also wanted the project to be restorative. So we wanted to improve the water quality, habitats, and ecosystems, and create a comfortable outdoor public space with the trees. We used natural approaches, which is the green infrastructure and the landscape. And we wanted the project to be educational and engaging for the community. At the south end of the project, we have an educational node. So the main section of the Greenway is 40 feet wide, but at the south end, there's a 60-foot section where the pedestrian bridge lands, and that creates an opportunity for the community to visit and enjoy. There's also, some educational signage and some public art components as well that talk about the history of the river and the river itself with the diatome. So there's a lot of thought put in for those educational components.
And Rob, from the construction side of things, what was the sustainability aspects that you were working on?
Sustainability, we definitely followed Stantec's lead on their design documents. One of the items that I most liked was the passive rain collection that Olga has mentioned, with the trench drains that drain down into the soil cell system. Whenever we have visitors on site, that is the most unique aspect, in my opinion, of the project, and it will definitely go unnoticed and unappreciated down the road. But definitely one of the things I love about the project is just how smart it was and self-sustaining. The project itself, too, on top of that, we set very high goals for waste diversion. We have 98% waste diversion goal on the project. We pass that down to all of our subcontractors. So, unfortunately, there's always significant construction waste in this industry, and we are trying our best to eliminate and divert that as much as possible.
And as a team, we are quarterly tracking how we're doing with sustainability. We have Atelier 10 on our team who helped us with this, and our client is very interested and supportive of exploring, all possible sustainability and resiliency measures. So we spent a lot of time exploring different uses of sustainable materials and concrete and asphalt, and we implemented as many as we could that were, kind of readily available and could fit within our budget.
Okay, thanks very much for joining us today, Olga and Rob.
We're so happy to be here, and I, want to give a shout out to New York City Economic Development Corporation, which is New York City EDC, what we've been referencing throughout. They've been an amazing client and a pleasure to work with, and this project is great because of them.
Yes, I second that as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys.